Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline is Keith Cossrow, a coordinating producer for A Football Life on NFL Network. Also has worked on other high-profile NFL projects such as the producer of Namath and Lombardi and working on Hard Knocks. So as you can see and hear, he is a very busy guy. Keith, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, not very many people get to spend a lot of time or as much time as you have and your crew have with Steve Young. So what did you learn in this project about Steve Young that maybe surprised you?
Well, one thing that didn't surprise us, not to not answer your question, but one thing that didn't surprise us is what an incredible storyteller Steve Young is. If you've ever listened to Steve, heard him interviewed or worked with him, you know he's about as eloquent and articulate as any pro athlete there's ever been. He's always been at NFL Films one of our 3 or 4 favorite people of all time to work with. So we do, my partner and I, Chris Barlow, who the two of us are the showrunners of our documentary series of Football Life on NFL Network, and we've done about 85 episodes now of
Wow.
Football Life. And when it came time to do Steve Young, we always were interested, but we knew we could do something special with Steve. And he happened to be working on an autobiography with a writer named Jeff Benedict. What we thought we could do special with Steve was to have him be the only voice in his documentary, in his episode of Football Life. We wouldn't interview anybody else. There probably aren't any other NFL players you could do this with. But we wanted to try it with Steve, and Chris Barlow, the director, ended up shooting with Steve over the course of a year in a multitude of places that occur throughout his life story, including BYU. There's a scene in the film in Lavelle Edwards Stadium in the stands, another scene where he stands in front of the statue of Brigham Young there on campus. And Steve delivered everything we would have hoped. I think it's a remarkable film. And in a way, it's its own autobiography. So you really get someone who's bearing his soul, who's taking you to all the places that were particularly meaningful in his journey to become a Hall of Fame player.
So Keith, Steve is the only voice in the entire documentary. Is that what you're saying?
He is, well, him and the narrator.
Yeah.
But very
Wow.
minimal narration. But it's a combination of Steve. The framing device of the film is Steve working on this autobiography with Jeff Benedict. So there are scenes where Steve is reading chapters from the book. And then there are scenes where Steve is in various places. We took him back to Candlestick Park, which is in mid demolition, and he stands on the old ruins of Candlestick Park, recounting all the great moments like the Terrell Owens catch. And
Wow. Yeah, Jeff Benedict talked about that and said it was just incredibly emotional.
The visuals are extraordinary. There's one shot where he's talking about fans calling for Joe Montana, and the camera actually rack focuses to both of their numbers retired in the rafters behind them, behind Steve's head. And it's just so visually arresting and moving on so many levels, and just Steve telling his own story and being there in that place that had so much meaning in his life. I think it adds up to something really powerful.
Keith Cossrow joining us at KeithCos66 on the Twitter machine, coordinating producer for A Football Life on the NFL Network, has had a huge part in putting together Steve Young's autobiography of sorts in visual form. Fascinating stuff. And clearly this takes a very long time to put together. But just how long have you been involved in this project?
Well, Jeff Benedict came to NFL Films, I want to say maybe 3 years ago, and had lunch with Chris Barlow and myself. And we talked about, he said, I'm working on this project with Steve. I'm not even sure what it's going to become. He's not sure he wants to publish it, but I have this, multi-100-page manuscript, and I think it's special. and I think there's something you guys could do that would sort of accompany it. And immediately, like I said, we always thought of Steve as someone who could tell his own story in a way very few people can. So Chris and I kind of looked at each other and said, "Oh boy, this could be really, really neat," and knew right away what we wanted to do with it. And Chris took on the project and directed every one of these shoots. And I, in my role here, we kind of run this series together. So I helped him along, and we would look at all the scenes as he was shooting them and figure out what was working and what wasn't, and just Chris just did a remarkable job, and Jeff and Steve, of figuring out where to go. There's one scene where Steve Young takes you to the hotel room in San Francisco where he used to stay, on Saturday nights, even for home games. An NFL team stays in a hotel. And he takes us to the hotel room he used to stay in and talks about the sort of dark place that it represented for him during all the years when he was playing behind Joe Montana and couldn't get on the field, and sort of the anxiety and the depression and everything he went through during that period. And it's an incredibly evocative scene. I mean, he describes, watching airplanes land, because you have a view of the airport there at San Francisco, and you actually see it all. And he's right in the actual room. And that's the way the film was directed and shot and conceived. And I think it really works on that level when you're in that place with the person who lived it, and he's actually sitting there looking around telling you, yeah, this is where it all happened.
That's incredibly powerful. And we've both been reading the book. I know it comes out next Tuesday. And, of course, this debuts, tomorrow night at 9 Eastern on NFL Network. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, tomorrow night. And yeah, it'll re-air a couple times during the weekend. But I think and anyone who checks it out, I think you'll really like it.
Yeah, it'll be. We really look forward to that. As one of BYU's native sons, I was going to say Brigham Young's native sons. Well, great. I think he's a great grandchild or great-great-grandchild of Brigham Young. What will BYU fans enjoy the most about this documentary?
There's a great clip of Bob Hope announcing Steve Young's presence on the old Bob Hope All-American team, if you remember that. And he makes one of his corny Bob Hope jokes about Steve being the descendant of Brigham Young.
Me and Bob Hope.
We always try to find vintage clips, and we have a team that does a great job of finding footage, third-party footage, that we can incorporate into these films. And so that's one that we were particularly pleased with for this film. And I think the whole sequence at BYU is something that's going to be of great interest to anybody from your area there or who's familiar with it. And, he talks about what he learned from Jim McMahon. He talks about, as a freshman, not being in uniform. Can you imagine Steve Young wasn't high enough on the depth chart to be in uniform? And when you're not in uniform, they give you 2 tickets so you can go sit in the stands. And he's actually, again, like we said, Chris did such a great job, and Jeff Benedict, of taking Steve to all these places. Steve is actually sitting in the stands on a beautiful day at Lavelle Edwards Stadium talking about that experience and that moment, and sitting there crying in the stands by himself and wanting to quit. And what happened after that, and why he stayed on the team, and obviously what followed is terrific. And it's so great to see Steve in that uniform playing football. The famous play where he catches the pass for touchdown, and just great moments at BYU. I think everybody there will really, really enjoy.
Keith, fantastic stuff.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
In fact, I want to just watch it right now. So I'm just going to leave the studio and go watch the show.
Well, it's one we're really proud of. We've done, like I said, over 80 original episodes of A Football Life now. It's the series is in its 6th season on NFL Network, and this episode about Steve Young is one we're just really pleased with, and hopefully Steve is, and hopefully everybody at BYU will enjoy it, because he's a special guy. It's a special story of someone who persevered, who experienced a lot of ups and downs, but never gave up on himself. And there's a lot of values and a lot of just a great example we can take from his story and apply to our own lives. And I think that's, that's why you watch a documentary on an athlete. That's why you tell these stories, and I think everybody will get something out of it.
Keith Cossrow, coordinating producer of Football Life on the NFL Network. Thank you for the time, my friend. We look forward to watching a great production tomorrow night.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.